This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 15th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The Gospel of the Lord. So a few years ago, I was working on my car with a friend of mine. Everything was going pretty well, except that there was one little machine screw that was rusted into the old part we were taking out. I needed that screw to put the new part in, and it should have been easy to find a replacement screw up at the Home Depot. So I headed up to Home Depot looking for this machine screw. But because I couldn't get the old screw out, I wasn't exactly sure what the proper length was that I needed. So I bought 2 screws of different lengths, reasoning correctly that one of them would fit. And I figured I would just return the one that didn't fit on a later trip to Home Depot. After all, each of these screws was only going to cost me 82 cents. So I bought the screws, finished the repair, and set the incorrectly sized 82-cent screw on the workbench with the receipt. And I figured that I would return it on a subsequent trip. But somehow, I never had that screw with me or remembered it on any subsequent trip to the Home Depot. And finally, on the day that the 30-day return period expired, I realized it was still sitting on the workbench. But I wanted my 82 cents back because I'm cheap. And I do this stuff all the time. Other people, reasonable people, would just say, "You know what, I'll toss the screw or throw it in the bin, but I wanted my 82 cents back." But I now had a choice. I could make a special trip up to the Home Depot to return the screw and get my 82 cents back, or just decide that it was not worth it. So I did some quick math, and I figured out that even with cheaper gas prices back then, it was going to cost me about $1.25 in gas to make the round trip. And then I'd have to stand in the returns line at Home Depot, and many of you have done that and know what an iffy situation that can be. So even I didn't do it. Even for somebody as cheap as I am, it just wasn't worth it. I tell you that story because in our society, it is easy to understand that taking almost an hour out of your day and spending a couple of dollars worth of gas and potentially having to put up with more Home Depot aggravation just is not worth 82 cents. No sensible person would do it. After all, even I wouldn't do it. It's just not worth it. But see, that is how both of these parables of Jesus sounded to his first hearers. Jesus says, he asks them, "Which of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, would not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost?" The answer? Nobody. Nobody would do that. Notice that Jesus does not even say, would leave the 99 safely in the sheepfold with other people watching them. He says, leave the rest in the wilderness, where they're going to potentially be subject to thieves and wolves. And who knows how long you'll be looking for that sheep. Even if the rest of the sheep are fine when you get back, the time you have spent looking for that sheep, even at shepherd's pay, is probably worth more than the sheep. It's like spending $2 in gas to chase 82 cents. It's just not worth it. Who would do such a thing? Or, says Jesus, this woman with the 10 coins, and when she loses one, she stops everything, lights a lamp, and searches the house until she finds it. It might take her all day. And if she lights a lamp, she may burn through enough oil to cost her almost as much as the coin is worth. In the meantime, she's not getting any of the work done that's critical to her household, which together with the oil will cost her quite a bit more than that one silver coin. It's like spending a couple of bucks in gas to find an 82-cent screw. It's just not worth it. Who would do such a thing? And the answer, apparently, is that God would. People have been noticing that Jesus is spending in what they consider to be an inordinate amount of time with folks whom they consider to be worth about 82 cents. Sure, they're fine to spend time on if you're heading to Home Depot anyway, but they're not worth making a special trip for. Yet Jesus is willing to make the special trip and to spend far more time than anybody thinks they're actually worth. And you can't really understand these parables if you romanticize the sheep as cute and fuzzy or the coin as shiny and special. You have to understand that by all accounts, these things would just not have been worth it to the people who were first listening to Jesus. And yet, says Jesus, even people who don't seem worth it to others are worth it to God. That's the point Jesus is making. And in making that point, Jesus is addressing at least three groups of people. First, he's addressing the people who think or have been told that they are not worth it. Sometimes we read this and think that Jesus is having a private conversation with the scribes and the Pharisees, but everybody's sitting there, including the tax collectors and sinners, the people who have been told that they're not worth it. Jesus talks to them too and assures them that they, in fact, regardless of what other people think, are worth it to God. And sometimes we are those people too. We're those people at moments in our lives when we figure maybe we've just gone a little bit too far off the deep end to be worth it to God. Now, of course, we don't say that to other people. We are taught in our society always to talk about how good we've been doing and how great, and if we've messed up, well, it's because somebody else kind of pushed us in the wrong direction. But by and large, we're pretty good people, and many of us, we are pretty good people. But there are moments in our lives where we sit back and we say, why does God really want to put up? Have I really done something here that makes me all that special to God? Why would God make a special effort to go looking for me? Jesus tells this parable to remind us that especially at those moments in our lives, Jesus cares about you. Jesus is also addressing people who think that they are worth it. See, the folks who criticized Jesus, they were also part of the audience, and Jesus doesn't tell them that they're not worth it. Jesus tells them, you're not bad people, but sometimes, like us, they needed to be reminded that they too were worth it to God, but not because they were worth more than others, not because somehow they were intrinsically more valuable to God than the people who they think are worth 82 cents. Jesus reminds them not to run around and think of people as worth 82 cents to God, largely because if I start thinking that that person over there is worth 82 cents to God, it's a real short step for me to start treating that person as though they're worth 82 cents to me. Jesus tells us everybody is worth it to God and calls us to be people who treat others like that as well. And Jesus is addressing people who, maybe all of them, think that God is going to be really irritated if people have to be sought out and found and somehow brought back into the fold. And yet in this parable, the shepherd and the woman, they don't resent what they're doing. They don't yell at the sheep or lock up the coin. That is sometimes surprising if you spend too much time. And one of the things we read at the beginning of the service was a story about Moses talking to God where God is really angry that people have messed up. And we sit there and we go, okay, well, that must be God's normal thing. Whenever somebody messes up, God must be really, really angry. And Jesus says, no, that's not God's only mood. That in fact, God is actually caring about people who are lost, people who are directionless, people who have done things and messed up. God is out there looking for them, and when God finds them, God rejoices. That is something that Jesus wants us to keep in mind. See, the shepherd and the woman, they rejoice in ways that also don't seem to be worth it, in which actually their friends and their neighbors would probably look at them and think, what is wrong with you? Look, I have my sheep, I have my coin. If somebody did that in your yard and like, come rejoice with me, I found a coin that I lost, I found $1 that I lost under the couch, you would think that neighbor was kind of pretty crazy. That rejoicing is not worth it, but it is to God. And that's what Jesus wants us to remember about God. You know, it really was not worth it for me to drive up to Home Depot and return an 82-cent screw. And there are a lot of things and a lot of situations in our lives like that where we realize things just aren't worth it. And particularly because we know so many times and situations where it's just not worth the effort or the cost, Jesus used these parables to make sure we understand that each of us is always worth the effort to God. Jesus used these parables to show us the extent God is willing to go and search for us, no matter how lost we may feel or how lost we may think others are. And even if the world looks on us or other people as expendable or disposable, or maybe just worth about 82 cents, Jesus used his life to show us our true value in God's sight.